Okay, well, we read chapters 9 and 10. 9, I think, is a good chapter, but it's not all that long, yet there's a lot you can say about it. 10 is long. I didn't realize just how long 10 was until I thought I was done, and there was a whole other section left, and it kind of kept going. So why don't we just kind of see how it goes as far as what we discuss? And if we get stuck on 9, we'll talk about 10 next week. But if we start moving real quick, we'll keep on going. But presumably we've all read 9 and 10. We'll just sort of see how today's go. So 9 is the easy path. Now, why would it be given the subtitle, The Easy Path?
Because there were two. There was the road that we're on.
Okay.
The way was hard, but there was an easy one next door.
All right. So I was reminded of there's a spot around it's kind of around Jupiter that the turnpike and Interstate 95, they're not just running parallel, but they're super close to each other. You can like look and you can see the road right between some trees next to you, and they go parallel for almost 10 miles, and then they start to diverge again. They started this way, they come together, they run parallel, and then they diverge. And I was almost reminded of that sense of seeing a parallel path, and it sure looked a lot nicer to walk on. I don't know how good their shoes are, but they seem to be complaining about the hard difficulty of the path. And when they look to the side, running right next to them, oh, it's soft and it's springy and it's nice to walk on. Whose idea is it? It's Christians. The one who ought to know better.
Yeah, that's what confused me.
Yeah, and this kind of gets into it a little bit on a few times. Walking with hopeful, which of them is ostensibly the more experienced and mature believers? Christian is. Hopeful is mentioned many times as being, younger in the faith, and is really relying on, bless you, Christian's wisdom and experience. And of all people, Christian who knows for sure not to get off the path, because he's done it a couple of times. It's been disastrous every time, and he's been very despondent and very sorry and wanting forgiveness, but it's his idea. Why do you think Christian who ought to know better does it?
Should have been lesson learned.
It should have been, but apparently it wasn't. So
well, his feet are hurting.
True. So, and it's kind of like my back has been hurting for a little over a week now. It's much better than it was. But there are a few things that make you feel old and decrepit, like a hurt back, because it affects everything.
We know.
Everything. So when you are walking and your feet start to bother you, it's a small thing, but it's kind of a big thing, right?
Yes.
If you've ever been on a long walk and like maybe your shoe is in a funny spot, or your shoe is starting to poke you over and over in the same spot, or your feet are just sore because you've been walking a long time. You can't walk your way out of it. So, as we're taking this all very allegorically, to consider our Christian walk on the path, that small sufferings, but when they're continual, can start to add up, at least in our thinking. So Christian knows better. We know that he knows better, but is somehow able to justify to himself that this pain can be avoided. What's some of the justification here? So he's in pain, and it can be way better for us. But he kind of is able to justify this to
It looks like it's parallel.
it looks like it's parallel.
Parallel to the way.
Yeah. So we're going the same way. So ultimately, this isn't much of a diversion. We're not breaking the law a lot, just a little bit. We're not sinning a bunch, just in this one small way. I mean, perhaps she's only a little pregnant. So, you know, he's got this great idea, but does it work out? Does the soft parallel path work out? No.
In the long run, no.
No. So they're able to kind of get by for a while, and it actually is sort of nice. It's a bit of a relief, and he probably feels pretty good about himself, like that was a smart decision. But then it comes back to bite them. And so what happens on this parallel path?
Now they run into vain confidence.
Okay, so now they've got somebody on the road with them. And tell us a little bit about vain confidence.
Well, vain confidence says that the path leads to the celestial gate, which is their aim.
Right.
But
So
luckily,
might as well
yeah.
stay on it.
They don't follow it very long before it gets dark, though.
Right. So vain confidence says this is the way to go. You're going to make it to the celestial city. Christian's very happy. See, I told you so. I was right. I made an executive decision, and I was right on. But it gets dark, and this seems to be one of those places or one of those nights where dark means dark. And I have been out in the country where the moon is out and the stars are out, and even late at night, there's this kind of beautiful light from above.
Like a glow.
And then I've been out on an overcast night, and it is just so dark, pitch black dark, and you can't see hardly in front of you at all. And it seems to be one of those times, places, or nights. They lose track of vain confidence in the dark. And as soon as it gets dark and they realize they don't know where they are, what's Christian's attitude?
You realize.
Yeah, it kind of comes to him at once, but it comes too late. Because now that they're in the dark, what can they do? Could they even go backwards if they wanted to? It's just too dark. So the other problem is it's the sort of darkness and the sort of path with traps laid out and steep falls. As a matter of fact, what happens to vainglory?
He
Falls
He falls in the pit. So to be vainglorious, to be very self-assured, be self-satisfied, to be deeply prideful in your own correctness, your own goodness, leads him into the darkness where he falls
into
and
the
he is
pit.
destroyed. He's in a pit sort of specifically laid out for people just like him who will confidently blunder into the darkness. And isn't he the one that all they get out of the end is just some moans and groans and never to be seen again? I think that's that's the one. So it goes from bad to worse when what happens next on the path.
Thunder and lightning.
Thunder
Thunder and lightning,
It floods.
and it starts to flood. Now, In Florida, we don't have the sort of flooding that you might have in other places. It's not that things can't flood, low spots, spots that are real paved over. But when you have like real hard ground in places like in the mountains or something where the water has no place to go down and absorb, flash floods can be extremely serious. You're out in the wilderness, you're out in the woods, you're out in the middle of nowhere. Matter of fact, there's warning signs about hearing sounds like a train. If water starts to appear and it starts to flow, get as high as you can, as quickly as you can, because it is, if you're in a place that can flash flood, water is extremely powerful. There's something like, I don't know, it's this ridiculously small amount of water, flowing water, but like, it's like only a couple of inches of actually flowing water is enough to move a car around. And we think it's not so bad until you're swept away. You're knocked off your feet and there you go. And then you can be taken who knows where or into who knows what. Crushed against a tree or a rock or spilled down into a crevice or a pit like Vainglorious was. So they are feeling like they're really up a creek, or very much so. So what do they do to try to protect themselves?
Well, there's a very interesting discussion about Hopeful saying, if only I'd stayed on the way.
Right?
He said he had his fears from the beginning. He tried to warn Christian, but Christian, I guess he figured Christian was more mature in the faith than he was, so
Right?
it was okay to follow him.
Probably should have been, right?
Yeah.
You're right. This is kind of a fun discussion because Hopeful did know better, but he didn't speak up. And he let the more wise and experienced one do what was pretty obviously the wrong thing to do. And now they're paying for it. And so they make a plan. We're gonna try to walk backwards and make it back to the path. And there's this fun kind of Christian says, well, let me make it up to you by going first. So if there's a danger along the way, because I led us this way, I will take the responsibility and the consequence. And Hopeful's like, you're actually like not batting 1,000 right now. I better go first. Basically, you're so upset, you're so worked up. I'm not sure we should trust your judgment right now, one way or the other. And so, bless you. There's this ends with a very interesting little phrase that I thought was pretty good. By this time, the floodwaters had risen much higher, making traveling back the way very dangerous. It was then that I understood it's easier to leave the way when you are on it than it is to get back onto it. And that's almost a throwaway line, but it's a very profound one.
I know what happened right before that. I heard an encouraging voice.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Turn back and yeah. So they are never left alone and bereft, but that doesn't mean they're left in a place where there's no danger. But I think it's a very true statement that it's always easier to stop doing good than it is to start doing good once you've done wrong.
You got a lot of ground to cover before you can get
That's right. That's right.
to the valley.
Okay. They try as hard as they could. They don't quite make it. They're exhausted. It's still in the dark. And so they find a little crevice or a little shelter or a little something, and they just kind of exhaustedly fall asleep. And this is going to lead into what issue?
They're trespassing.
They are trespassing. So they are now on somebody else's property, and it's going to be a problem. So this is very much one of those, you know, you would think there would be a sign posted like no, trespasser will be shot or something like that, because the owner of this land kind of freaks out. It is not enough to apologize. It is not enough to leave. He is going to hold them captive. So who is the owner of this land? A giant.
Giant despair.
So he's way bigger and presumably way stronger than they are. And his name is Despair. So they can get no mercy or forgiveness from Despair, and it's not good enough to turn around and just leave. Once they have trespassed, what is Despair's plan for them? Yeah, he forces them back to his castle and he locks them up in a dungeon, which seems pretty severe for trespassing in the dark. But I just had a very sad and unfortunate discussion with someone very recently who was complaining that some consequences were unfair. This bad thing happened to me. Why am I the one suffering consequences? Well, because you made the terrible choices that put you in that situation in the first place. This wasn't an issue of being an innocent bystander and, some bad thing happened out of the blue. They were deliberate, obviously bad choices that led someone down a path where bad things were bound to happen, and then they finally did. And whether they seemed unfair at the time, well, had those terrible choices never been made, that never would have come up. If they had not strayed from the path, they would have never trespassed on the land of Despair the Giant. So, can we summarize then the experience of being in the dungeon?
Unpleasant.
Very unpleasant.
No food or water or light from was it Wednesday to Saturday night? That's a long time.
Days, yeah, and they're chained up, they're locked in, and it's misery, and it's giving Christian plenty of time to be, guilty and sorrowful, because they are where they are, really because of him. You would even not blame maybe Hopeful for being very resentful. But I don't think he is. We don't get much of that, at least. So it goes from bad to worse, though. So they move from just being held prisoner in miserable circumstances. How does it get even worse?
Diffidence, the wife.
Okay, the giant has a wife. Her name is Diffidence, which is kind of like mistrust. And oftentimes we assume that the wife or the woman is sort of the mitigating factor, the tempering factor in a relationship. But what is Diffidence's advice to her husband, the giant?
Tell them to kill themselves.
Tell,
Give them the tools.
beat them up,
Beat them up.
and then convince them to commit suicide. What a delight. She must be a charming lady. So we have this, it's not dwelt on, but in my mind, I've got like some really ugly images of them helpless and being beaten with a club. To be struck with something is bad enough, but to not be able to defend yourself. So anywhere that is struck without anything at all to mitigate the blow. And I get the impression they are beaten not just mercilessly, but rather savagely. This is not killing them, but this is to make them wish they were dead. And this comes with a promise. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing this. This is your life now. Your life is this miserable dungeon and it's pain. And every day I'm going to come and I'm going to hurt you again and again. What's the only way out?
Suicide.
Suicide. Suicide. Your life is over and it's worthless. The only thing you can do to end the pain is to take your own life. And he, here's a knife, here's a noose, here's poison. Feel free. I encourage it. There's a weird interaction where he is both the source of their problems and acting like he's also the solution at the same time. Let me give you the solution to the problem I'm causing, which is pretty awful. Is it tempting?
Well, it is to Christian.
It is to Christian.
So he's already feels
Guilty, he's feeling guilty.
It's his fault. Not theirs.
He feels terrible that this is his fault in the first place. But I think they're also coming to a point where this is torture. And he can't endure much more. The psychology of torture is an interesting thing. We learned about it, talked about it a little bit in an ethics class in seminary. The professor I had at the time was very personally experienced with writing military and international policy. And in some of the discussions about the nature of torture, and I was in seminary. This was prior to 9/11. So a lot of the issues that were going to get raised in like 2002, 2003, Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, what is enhanced interrogation, and what can you do to someone who has information about an imminent terrorist act? What would you do? And that became kind of a big cultural conversation. There were movies made about it. There were trials. So I remember talking to this guy about the nature of torture and stuff prior to it being, it was sort of on the radar, but it wasn't as sharp and as obvious as it became very shortly thereafter. I mean, I graduated in 2001. I graduated in May, and of course 9/11 is in September that same year. So this would be a couple of years before that. And the psychology of torture. And basically there's the training that he was familiar with that they would give people, whether in intelligence circles or people who were, going to be in a place where this was a possibility, was everybody breaks. Everybody breaks. And you kind of like prepare yourself mentally for that, and you sort of make some decisions about what you can give them. What kind of information can you give them? Because you're going to break, because everybody does. There comes a point where your brain is simply broken, as your spirits are broken with the ongoing nature of the pain or the torture, the darkness, the hopelessness, whatever it might be. And we are very close to Christian's breaking point. And we can say that it's also the guilt on top of it. It's also the circumstances he was responsible for. But just considering being in the situation and being told there is no hope and this is the rest of your life. You are given a way out. It seems to be a terrible way, a tragic way, an awful way. But the pain would end. And nobody likes to be in constant pain. I know around this table, we are each in our own way familiar with chronic pain. But to have it to be so severe, so acute, and there to be a way out. Because I have to work quite closely at times with mental health issues. This is a very hard and sad section for me to read. That people genuinely feel like they're in a position of torment, of constant, unending torment, and there is no way out. What Hopeful keeps encouraging him with, all the things you've been through before, and you've already survived so much, and certainly God wouldn't abandon us. Let me just say, this is, and different sections will hit home for different people. This one hits home for me a lot. It cannot be escaped the very obvious connotations of the allegory here. That they are held captive by a giant. And that giant's name is despair. Despair is, in moral theology, one of the mortal sins. Despair is the it's sort of the technical definition of what is referred to as the unforgivable sin and the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. So, blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, the unforgivable sin, briefly, it kind of comes in two parts, but those parts overlap and intersect. The first part is calling that which is of God of the devil, and that which is of the devil of God. So you've completely reversed good and evil in such a fundamental and comprehensive way that which is good has to be rejected and destroyed, and that which is wicked has to be embraced and absorbed. That despair is being convinced that God will not or cannot help you. It is unforgivable, not because God is punishing us for doing such a terrible thing. It is unforgivable because to be in that posture, you will not receive forgiveness. You choose to reject it. The people who blaspheme the Holy Spirit by saying wicked is good and good is wicked, and God cannot or he will not help me because I have been rejected by God, therefore I reject him back. They have so turned their hearts, their souls, their minds, everything so against God, everything offered to them is completely rejected. If not, even you don't even see it. For those of you who were doing, Narnia with me years ago, in the last battle, this is the dwarves who were thrown through the stable door, and in the darkness, they are offered paradise. But they have chosen that the dwarves are for the dwarves. And even when they are offered a goblet of wine, they smack it away that it's dirty stable water. Even when they're offered the bread of heaven, they throw it away that it's moldy stuff that was picked up off the ground. They can't, their eyes are closed so tight. This is about the door of hell being locked on the inside. You have so convinced yourself that you will not be saved. God hates me, or God doesn't care, or God doesn't exist. That even when the life preserver is thrown to you, you reject it. Even when the ladder is lowered down to hoist you up, you refuse it. That's unforgivable, not because God isn't willing to forgive. It's because we won't ask for it and we won't take it. That's despair. And Christians like this, he is willing to consider suicide because in his torment, he sees no hope. That's despair. God cannot or will not save me from this. I've got to do it myself. And that is what he is considering. And it is gigantic when you are in its clutches. It's monstrous and enormous when you are locked in its dungeon. And it may just be because of my own circumstances and the people I care about and the people that I've had to minister to and work with. But this scene hits me deeper than a lot of the other ones do. And I think it's exceptionally well rendered in an allegorical fashion. The true danger of despair. People do the unthinkable because they believe there are no options left. So
if you had cancer and you were dying, and it was just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Would you decide not to take your medicine?
That's quite possible, but I wouldn't count that within despair to allow a natural process to continue. Not at all. However, I think a purposeful overdose to rid yourself of that pain now gets into that direction. Walked with more than a few people who have said, this time through, I am not taking the chemo. And I just say, okay, we're gonna help you all the way through. And that is not a decision that I would try to talk somebody out of, at least not very hard. I mean, I might just kind of probe it some to make sure that it's not just an emotional reflex. But if it's a considered and faithful decision,
My sister was, as she was dying, she wouldn't eat. And I said, Lynn, you've got to eat. She said, why?
Yeah, no, I don't. No, I don't. Now, we're getting a little afield here, but this is where we start finding our moral lines. Someone who, as they are dying or as they're incapacitated, no longer wants to eat or drink versus no longer being provided food or water.
Yeah.
And that is a different line. So,
And
anyway.
that's why they ask you for if you have written anything about your last wishes.
Right. So a DNR is not a suicidal decision. A do not resuscitate, like don't crush my ribs doing chest compressions because I have terminal cancer with days to live. Yeah, that is saying I don't want certain interventions, not I want that's not throwing yourself off a cliff. So in its lowest, it is really hopeful that keeps Christian going.
Yeah,
I think that in and of itself is a significant allegory. Had Christian been on his own, would he have made it? I don't know.
No,
I don't know. Now, it was within Christian's power all along to escape, but he needed to be almost held and supported through that darkest point before he could remember he had a way out. And without Hopeful there to pat him on the back and kick him in the butt, not everything that Hopeful said was softness. He kind of poked him a couple of times, like, almost how dare you? But there is a reminder of the providence of God. There is a reminder of what he has already been brought through. This is another moment where I I just almost invariably and reflexively go back to doubting Thomas and the wounds of Christ, that in the resurrected, glorified body, there are still wounds. There's still the marks of the cross, but they are no longer marks of defeat or agony or suffering or pain. They're signs of glory. This moment, this darkest moment in Christian's life, where he nearly succumbs to despair, will become instead yet another shining example, if not one of the brightest examples of God's grace, because it was so dark. And it'll be a story that's not forgotten, but it will be transformed in the light of God's presence. Instead of being, later on, he could tell this story and he could do so with a smile. God got me out of even that. How does he get out?
He remembers he has a key.
He always had a key. He always had a key. And now, the key is what? What is the key called?
Promise.
Promise. The key is called promise. Now, it's not really explained so much as simply stated. So anybody want to take a stab? What is so powerful about promise that it can unlock the dungeon of despair? Hope. Well, first of all, what kind of promise is this? Is it promise in general, in a kind of an intellectual
No, I think it's
metaphorical
more specific
sense?
than that, because the general one becomes a platitude.
Mhm. Yes, and this does not seem to be platitudinous. This is more, I'm going to say these are the promises of God.
Right.
That when you are marked as Christ's own forever, that he will keep his promise. God has made the promise to save us, not us to make it through, but him to bring us through, and he keeps his promises. So that's this key that unlocks, even though the last door, they have to kind of fight it. Like it's hard and it's rusty, but that promise is enough even to unlock that, and they're able to run. So to consider what we've talked about, despair, God cannot and will not help me. The counter to that, the freedom, the way out is promises. If you can know, remember, and trust that promise, then he can save me and he will save me. He has said it and he keeps his promises. Even if I don't see it, I don't have the slightest idea how he's going to get me out of this one. But he did not deliver faithful from the sword back in Vanity Fair. But even through that death, remember, he gets the high road to go straight to the celestial city. Even that is a promise, that even my death is not the end. That even the worst case scenario is not actually the worst case scenario. So easier said than done. And I also like the fact that he has to remember it. It's not obvious and easy. That's like telling somebody depressed, have you ever tried just feeling happier? Oh, okay.
Why did I think of that?
Right? Can't you just look on the bright side? Thanks. He endures much before remembering. And I think that being able to regain the promise and the fact that it is a struggle and a stretch, and there's time, there's suffering, I think is well considered. I will say though, it's not great writing. What do you think my objection is to his narrative technique? Do you remember him being given a key at any point?
No.
I don't. I don't. So this principle is usually referred to in terms of Chekhov's gun.
Deus ex machina.
Yeah. So Anton Chekhov, the Russian playwright, and as he is, kind of laying out some guidelines to writing fiction, especially like he's writing like, here's a detective story or whatever. If the murderer is going to use a gun in Act 3, show the gun in Act 1. Demonstrate, lay the pieces out so that if someone were to put the pieces together properly, they could see it. You can surprise people by pieces not fitting in the way they expect them to, but it's kind of cheating to throw stuff in at the last second that your reader would have no way to know, to think about, or to understand. So yeah, there's a little Deus ex machina. The God comes out at the end and solves all the problems instantaneously. This is one of those things where if early on, like maybe when he's given the scroll, he's also given a key, and now chapters later he remembers, we would be like, yeah, the key. And instead it's like, oh, okay, whatever, he had a key. So anyway, it's just a little narrative critique by someone who has written far less books and sold far fewer books than John Bunyan. So in my grand ability to say that, one of the most famous works of fiction of all time is lacking somehow.
There are places though, it seems a little bit forced.
Yeah. So yeah, and we kind of talked about that in that very first introduction where it is sort of a product of its time. And I mean that not just in its sensibilities of some of the theology, but also in its in the way that it's laid out narratively. We would say it's still too on the nose sometimes, but this was a trailblazer. Nobody had ever done this before. It might seem obvious to us now, but that's just because we've seen all the imitators over the years. Okay.
I wondered when I was reading this, whether the fellow who rewrote changed anything at all. My having never read the book in the first place, I had no idea. But I just wondered whether any of the details changed.
So for a couple of these, I have both read a PDF and I've listened to the audiobook, just as little backups. I think it covers it pretty well. It's just, if anything gets streamlined, it's pretty minor. Certainly a few things are changed, and names and words are changed because of, to our archaisms we wouldn't necessarily get. But even he still named the guy Vainglory, and that's not exactly a term we use except in Rite One. So I don't think he's changed an awful lot. Okay, that's chapter 9. Do we want to try to go through chapter 10?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. So we will probably move a little more quickly through chapter 10, partly because it's a little less personal to me, but also because we don't want to be here all day. So we start off, they've escaped the doubting castle, continued on the way, and ascended to the Delectable Mountain. And I've got to say, I just don't like that name. Because and it's not his fault, it's my fault. That's just an archaism. That is a word that made a lot more sense when he wrote it. This is like hearing how down in Bedrock the Flintstones have a gay old time. We don't use that word the same way anymore.
Make it something to eat.
100%. To me, delectable is not just something you're eating, but it's a very dainty little.
Yeah.
And that's my fault because that's not what he intends. But yeah, and I just don't like it. But what is delectable in this sense? Because he's not eating mountains. The mountains aren't tasty. Very pleasing. Pleasing in a way that you you see them as desirable and good. They are pleasurable in its proper way. You want them because it is a good thing. And in these mountains, which are beautiful and desirable, he runs into who? I'm sorry, because he's still with faithful, runs into who?
Shepherds.
Shepherds. So there's sheep and there are shepherds. And we might really call these under shepherds, couldn't we?
Yes.
For they do have a good shepherd who has laid down his life for his sheep. And remember, this is all a very obvious allegory. And so Jesus is a good shepherd, and these guys work for him, and blah, 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 blah. This is where I'm reminded of my my church history professor, and he says, you clergy out there, you guys aren't the shepherds. Jesus is the good shepherd. You're the sheepdogs. That's why you wear collars. So I thought that was pretty good. These shepherds are knowledge, experience, watchful, and sincere. And just like when we get bad guys and they have very obvious bad names, we have good names. And so if you think about the nature of sheep and shepherds within scripture and within Christian discipleship, we tend to think of the sheep who wander off. Sheep are kind of dumb and they have to be protected and provided for. They have to be protected from outside dangers. They have to be protected from going off by themselves and getting lost or into danger. And that's what the shepherds do. The shepherds keep the faithful all together, safe and provided for. So in that manner, for Christians as a whole, what keeps us together and safe and provided for? Knowledge, experience, watchfulness, and sincerity. Each of these virtues or qualities kind of shepherd us in a Christian life. Knowing the word, knowing ourselves, knowing the dangers, knowing life, experience. With the been there, done that, it's not simply academic or intellectual, but with the practical experience of knowing what works in reality and not just on paper.
Assuming that you learn the lesson.
Assuming that you learn your lesson. So when I teach about biblical wisdom, I had some sort of a framework that I might mess up if I just do it off the top of my head, but it's like godly knowledge applied rightly over time, or something like that. But the idea is wisdom isn't just knowledge. It's knowledge that has to be applied properly and multiple times. The wise man is the one who is dependable, not who's smart, but you can count on to know and to do the right thing. So these are what's shepherding us, these experience, watchfulness. So being on watch for ourselves, for the danger, and being careful, not being blasé through life, not being ignorant, but being on our guard, and sincerity. Sincerity can be quite powerful in keeping us together and protected and provided for. If only for the fact that the opposite, the insincerity, goes hand in hand with hypocrisy. And hypocrisy goes hand in hand with apostasy. And once you start linking those hands together, you get in trouble very, very, very quickly. So what do these shepherds do?
Get friendly with them, invite them to stay.
Right.
Enjoy the mountains.
This is a place for pilgrims to rest. Be renewed, be refreshed. You are safe here. And you can be renewed here. And then after they've slept the night and regained some strength and stuff, they say, well, would you like us to show you around? So they're here kind of on these delectable mountains and the hills and the stuff, and we can show you things. And I was reminded a little bit of the mansion, where they get shown different scenes.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that the shepherds show Christian and Hopeful?
The hill of error.
The hill of error. It's steep. And what's at the bottom of it? Dead people whose bodies have been broken on the rocks far below. So they got connected to error. They slipped and they fell, and it was a long, fatal fall. So be on your guard. That climbing high in error can lead you to a tragic and terrible fall. Okay, what else? We've got another mountain named Caution. Okay. And there's a little scene going on here, and it takes some explanation. So what's the scene that they see on the hill of Caution?
Then walking up and down in between graves
Right.
and stumble.
That's right. And what is the explanation for why they are there? It's a pretty sad one.
They're blind.
They are blind. They got caught by the giant.
Mm-hmm.
The giant released them, but he blinded them first. And now they walk as blind men, stumbling over graves again and again and again. They left the way, and instead of making it back like you did, they didn't commit suicide, but now they're lost. They continue to stumble around, surrounded by death, and forever in their blindness. Okay, I poked at John Bunyan a minute ago about giving us a key out of nowhere. Here's something he didn't have to say, but I found it just right. So the shepherd describes this scene with the men blinded by despair and wandering, and it says, after hearing this, Christian and Hopeful looked at each other with tears streaming down their faces, and they said nothing to the shepherds. That is a very powerful moment narratively for me, because there but for the grace of God go I. They are overcome by realizing that could have been them. They strayed off the path. They didn't have to have made it to where they were. And they're seeing one of the potential consequences in the tears of sorrow for them, but also tears of humility for themselves. And I think it's a lovely moment. And we've got a door on the side of a hill. And that's not a very nice door.
No.
What does that doorway lead to?
A road to hell.
It leads to hell. And we get a little explanation there. And by sort of extension here, if they'd made it down that door to hell, they must have been on the path as pilgrims first, because you've been a long way now on this path. So someone has traveled as a pilgrim if they've made it down that particular doorway to hell. So there's some pathos and tragedy to that. And he likens it, the shepherds do, to some people who have been pilgrims, but then left. He calls out Esau, he calls out Judas, he calls out Alexander and Ananias and Sapphira. Biblical examples, Old Testament and New, of people who had every opportunity, who had every chance, and threw it all away. So this is, it's a warning, isn't it? Like there's scenes in the mansion.
Okay.
See the potential consequence and outcome and learn from it. Don't do what don't do what they did. And I think that is not, it's not for nothing that they are given another reminder that as far as you've gotten, you can still stumble that like they did. All right, so they're given written instructions on the way out. That's kind of nice. And they're told to beware the flatterer, and one of them says, "Don't sleep on enchanted ground." And the last one says, "I wish you well." And then it's Bunyan says, "I then woke from my dream." And I had to look that one up because I was listening to an audiobook version, and the guy stopped and he explained it. Bunyan was writing a lot of this during one of his prison stays. And he actually got released from prison as he was finishing his chapter. He stopped writing. So the chapter's not even done yet. He picked up the finish of it later. I don't know how much time. I don't know if there was a lot of time, but he was like, "Hey, you're getting paroled." And so he like, and then I woke up and he left. So he does pick this up again to say, "Oh, and I fell asleep again immediately." So if that ever seemed weird, like, well, why did he wake up? And then the very next line is, "I fell asleep again." Historically, it's because something happened in his life. And this takes us into the two last sections. The one with ignorance is relatively brief. So we're gonna hit that very, very quickly. Tell us, who can explain this interaction with ignorance? I'm going to say this one is pretty straightforward. The little faith is the one that kind of warrants more discussion. So,
Well, he points out he didn't start the right way.
he didn't start at the wicket gate. He found a broad, isn't this like the broad gate or the broad path, which we know leads to destruction, but he's gotten himself onto the way. Where does ignorance think he's going?
To the celestial
I'm going to
city.
Celestial City. I don't know why you're so weirded out by that. I'm totally going where you're going.
Yeah.
But does he have the certificate? No.
No.
Is it the wicket gate?
Yeah.
No. Because in my country, we have these other ways. We have these other paths. And I am confident that we are right. And that my way to get there is just as valid as yours.
He's content to follow his own religion.
He is content to follow his own religion. Now, I think that this is not just allegorical in the sense of broadly ignorant.
Or being embarrassing.
I'm going to say I think it's different than being a Pharisee. Anybody want to take a crack at this? What's the ignorance here?
Well, I put that sentence where he said, God has said he wouldn't. Not that, well, because of ignorance.
Okay, I am going
God's.
He doesn't really understand what's going on.
right.
What he's supposed to do.
I am perfectly willing to be wrong on this. I think this is a specific type of ignorance. I think this is because about the far country and the foreign way and stuff like this. I think this is about followers of other religions.
Yeah.
I think he could have called this guy a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever. I have given alms. I have prayed. I have paid back every debt. I have done all of the good, righteous things required of me. Certainly, that will earn me entrance into the celestial kingdom. But there is no understanding of grace. There is no acknowledgement of Christ. There is no acceptance of the mercy required because our good works are never sufficient. So there is a works-based religion from this guy's culture and country, whatever it happens to be, that he has followed well, but he is ignorant to the grace that will overcome the fact that that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's my argument. I could be wrong, but that's how I just couldn't shake the sense that he was trying to set up. Well, what about the person in China who never heard the gospel kind of stuff? What about the good man who doesn't go to church, but they are very nice to their neighbors kind of stuff? So ignorance not hearing it. They're trying to explain. Christian is maybe a little sharp with him, you know, but Hopeful has sort of an interesting response. What's Hopeful's suggestion here?
He hopes that he will not later refuse to accept
I'm
good
a good
counsel.
Yeah, let's try again later. I don't think we're gonna get anywhere right now. Clearly, you guys are at odds, and he's not gonna listen. But you know what? If he keeps walking with us, there might be another chance. So let's table this and let's talk later. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. It may not be a fatal flaw that this guy doesn't get it. And maybe, just maybe, there will be an opportunity later to be confronted. I didn't get it, and now I know. And I think we've all experienced this time, not just in other people, but I'm assuming in ourselves. I certainly have. I just wasn't ready to hear the truth about something. Like, I was super convinced I was right, or it didn't make any sense to me what you're saying. But then it was only later. And it looked like there at the time, maybe I couldn't. Or I definitely wouldn't. But I was in a position later where I could. So there's hopeful will remain hopeful, that ignorant will always be ignorant. All right. Our last section, it is rather long, the assault on little faith. So we have seen Christian and his companions be attacked, or they have to fight off, or on trial, or executed, or imprisoned, or whatever. But this time, it's not them. Who has something terrible happen to them?
Little faith.
Little faith, who's a person who now joins them on the way. And what is the story of little faith?
He stopped to rest in the wrong place.
Yep. He was on the path too, but he stopped to rest in the wrong place. And he is assaulted. He's assaulted in the middle of the road. He is jumped. He's attacked by faint heart, mistrust, and guilt. 3 villainous brothers. They came from the Broadway gate. Remember the broad is the way that leads. And they threatened his life. And they demanded his money. And what did he do? What did little faith do?
Nothing.
Not too much. He cries out like, "Help, help, thieves, stop."
Yeah.
And they just basically don't stop him. They beat him almost to death.
Steal his bag of
They take his money and they beat him up for good measure. And they might have finished the job had not something happened. What happened?
They heard a noise, and they thought
They
it
heard something coming.
might be Grace.
It might be Great Grace, who lives in the town of Good Confidence. Great Grace, which we will find out is a champion of the king. And I think he's great in the sense of despair is a giant. Great is awesome and good and powerful. For grace is sufficient in all circumstances and is powerful beyond reckoning. And these thieves run off. So little faith is safe. What they stole his money, and that was very upsetting to little faith. But what did they not steal? They didn't steal his jewels.
Or his
and
certificate.
they didn't steal his certificate. Could they have?
Yeah.
It seems like they could have done anything they wanted. So why didn't?
No, they probably didn't want the certificate.
Aha, so these guys, remember who they are. They're guilt, faint heart, mistrust. These are bad guys. The certificate has no value to them, and neither do those jewels. The jewels that are of such precious value to Little Faith, to Christian, to Hopeful, to all such pilgrims are worthless to these bad guys. And they're not even worth picking up off the ground for them. So we have kind of an interesting interaction with the three pilgrims. What's Hopeful's take on all this?
Sad story.
It's sad.
I think if we
This poor man.
I think Hopeful's a little annoyed. I think Hopeful thinks that Little Faith is kind of a wuss. And Hopeful says, it sounds like these guys were cowards. If they ran off because they thought Great Grace was approaching, well, if Little Faith had fought them off, I bet they would have run away. They're probably the sort of bully that looks real scary, but as soon as you actually stand up to them, they're cowards on the inside and they run away. And Hopeful seems to be maybe a little annoyed at Little Faith, but I think also very pretty self-assured that if I was in that position, I would have fought. And we have kind of a nice interaction, nice little teaching moment from Christian. What's Christian's take on that?
He's comparing them back to Esau and people that did wrong
Right?
deliberately.
Right. Who did give away their jewels.
Right.
They gave away what was precious to them.
Little Faith.
Little Faith did not. So don't be so hard on Little Faith, first of all, because he hung on to what was most important. But what about the supposed bravery against the thugs? There is a great wisdom from the contemporary philosopher, Mike Tyson, who back when he was winning championships all the time, said, everybody has a plan until you punch them in the face. Because they would talk to these opponents, like, oh, you're the number one contender, and are you going to be the one to finally take down Iron Mike? And they would all say something like, well, I got a plan. I got a plan. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. We worked out this strategy, how we're going to face him and how we're going to beat him. And there's a stretch of a few years where Mike Tyson kind of came out of nowhere and just seemed like an indestructible machine. And so everybody had a plan, and that was Tyson's point. Everybody's got a plan until you punch him in the face. And as soon as you get punched in the face, that plan goes right out the window. It's very easy for Hopeful to talk about how brave he would be. Christian says, I've been in a fight like this, and it went nothing like I thought of. I am glad God brought me through with my life, because if he hadn't, I wouldn't have made it. Yeah, these guys are cowards, but there were 3 of them. And once they start hitting you, you don't know what's going to happen.
He points out Great Grace has scars. And
Great Grace has scars. You are young in the faith, Hopeful. And I hope it's true that you would always resist and you would be courageous and strong, that kind of stuff. But be careful, because until you've been punched in the face, you don't really know. And I think there's wisdom in that perspective. As a matter of fact, as I was reading it, I started thinking about the hymn, stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. There's this
Huh?
line that I always wondered, like, why was it in there about through every call of danger, be never wanting there. Now, you can take wanting in two different directions. Never wanting in the sense of never lacking, to be called into the fray, never be lacking in your courage and lacking in your faith. But I think it actually goes to say, don't be so eager to jump into battles. Stand up for the cross of Christ, but don't go looking for fights.
Yeah.
To be honest, there's enough trouble anyway. In the martial art I teach, it's, philosophically, we try to drum into the kids. It's a defensive art. It's not an offensive art. It's not about making things worse. It's about making things better. It's not about kicking butt. It's about protecting yourself for somebody else. And so it's not this aggressive stance where you start looking and pushing people around to prove how tough you are. Most of the guys who are high-level practitioners are very chill. They're very calm, cool, and collected. They got nothing to prove. But people who have been in some fights before are usually not eager to be in more because they know how bad it can go. In a split second, something that you don't expect, and you can be real good, but all it takes is one little slip, or all it takes is one moment that you don't see or you're not prepared for, and awful things can happen. So I find it a little instructive. Sometimes it's just the stuff that occurs to me. So I apologize if this seems kind of needless to anybody else. But I really do like that idea of have our self-regard tempered with humility. Lead us not into temptation. God, if you don't mind, could you give us a detour around the tough parts of life? Now, if you don't, I know you're going to bring us through, but I would rather not, if it can be helped.
Not get beat to hell.
Yeah, like it sounds good to me to avoid that. What else? I think hopeful is all. I'm not going to call him disdainful, but he is still he's a little condescending, maybe, or looking down at little faith. And maybe it's because of his name sounds like a pejorative. Because it's diminutive, little, I think it comes across as pejorative. Little faith. Little faith is worse than having big faith. Big faith is good, little faith is bad. It sounds critical. Not as critical as some of the names of the obvious bad guys, but it doesn't sound particularly heroic to be called little faith. Like, do you want that name? Little faith? No. Sort of smart? Not completely stupid? You wouldn't like those kind of titles, but what is Christian's explanation of little faith to kind of counter, again, I'm not going to say he's like really looking down on him, but sort of.
Besides, he describes some of the great names that failed. Peter.
That's right. Some wonderful scriptural names, powerful saints who could be described, "O ye of little faith," Jesus says to apostles. Peter, and this is a little bit, this is taken in the same context of be very careful looking at all these fights and assuming you're going to be really brave. Remember, Peter was going to take a sword to defend Jesus. And then later that same night, he's scared of a servant girl around a fire and he denies Christ 3 times. So when push comes to shove, we're not really sure how we're going to respond. So be kind of careful of that. What is powerful about little faith is not the little part, it's the faith part. That's a gift. God bestowed upon him a smaller amount, but that amount is genuine and true, and that amount is enough. Now, little faith is going to have a hard time with things. Little faith, because of his faith being little, might have to suffer a little more, work a little harder, go through things that somebody like hopeful might not. But he's got a certificate just like you. He has got his ticket punched just like you. And that faith, remember, faith is a gift from God. So God has bestowed upon him this faith, and it is saving faith. Though we might consider it smaller in relation to what it could be, it is genuine nonetheless. And I think that's worth pointing out. Never be boastful that your faith is greater than another, for it is not a mark of your will or your righteousness. Faith is first and foremost considered a spiritual gift. And so that means that God bestows upon us differently according to his purposes and plans. And so that's not to say that we shouldn't work with it and hone it and mature it and develop it and everything else, but it is to say even a little faith. Well, at one point, little faith is sort of a critique, as the disciples are afraid that the boat is going to sink. But Jesus also says, just a little faith. The mountain is moved.
Yep.
The tree is uprooted and thrown into the sea. And he is a pilgrim on the same road, just like they are. Anything else on this section?
Towards the end, it says, Christian is saying to the other gentleman, I'm still alive only because of his goodness and grace,
Right.
not because of great spiritual maturity on my part.
That's right. So let's be prepared for what's coming up next. We want to have our shield of faith, and we want to, be ready, because we know that there's going to be more trials and turmoil.
1:30.
But it will be God who sees us through, no matter what. All right. Are we good?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
much better than when I was reading.
Yeah.